What do I need to say? Just that I'm Peter Van Dyck?
Yeah, let me record it with audio too. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm Peter Van Dyck.
Peter Van Dyck is a 41-year-old painter and PAFA professor. He is a member of a loosely affiliated group of artists known as the perceptual painters, who work only from direct observation or imagination. Like so many artists, he had a show that was prematurely halted due to the coronavirus.
The show was at the Harrisburg Area Community College, the Rose Lehrman Art Gallery. 15 paintings done over the course of many years, although I think all of them had been worked on within the year prior to the show. It was up for maybe a couple weeks before the school had to close. Sadly, I don't think a lot of the folks that I was hoping to take out to the show had a chance to get out there.
I love Peter's work. I asked him how he learned to paint so well.
My first exposure to painting was through the academy. I took some continuing education classes in my senior year of high school. That was my gateway drug into painting, and I was just totally sold on wanting to do it. But I had to go to college. That was the plan, at least. I did that for a year, and then I left college to go first back to PAFA for part of a semester. And then I went to the Florence Academy of Art in Florence, Italy. When I was at PAFA, I could see people doing awesome stuff that I wanted to do, but it looked like those people were just really talented. I didn't feel like I could learn to do what I wanted to do at PAFA, not because the school didn't have it, but just that I wasn't good enough for it. So I wanted to go to this almost like boot camp style school, the Florence Academy of Art. It is what nowadays is known as an atelier style school, started by an American painter named Daniel Graves. There were probably about 30 people when I was there. I think it's a lot larger than that now. And in Florence, it looked like they were guaranteeing that you would learn to do some fundamental things really well. It was gradated in terms of its difficulty. It would start with copying drawings. Eventually, you were allowed to work from the cast, and then eventually from the figure.
Painting done in ateliers typically is highly figurative and often has a 19th century quality. Your mature paintings are far from that.
It's really funny because I had a teacher at the Florence Academy who was my mentor, Ramiro Sanchez, who I just adore. And the thing that he was teaching us always was about designing the shapes of the figure or the cast. That seemed like a pretty modern thing to me. Maybe that was just peculiar to his teaching, but when I left Florence, that really stayed with me. Finding a shape design that you could lock the appearance into.
Peter absorbed the lessons of the Florentine boot camp, but coming back to Philadelphia was the beginning of a second education for him.
Teaching at PAFA has been an essential part of my education as a painter. That really changed the way I was thinking about painting.
Much of that was being exposed to a different kind of representational painting, an approach championed by PAFA professor Scott Noel. The first time I saw one of Peter's paintings was in a 2014 group show at PAFA, curated by Scott. The show was like a manifesto for the Perceptual Painters Group, which was formed in 2008 by Brian Rigo and David Campbell, two artists who had studied with Scott. Scott himself joined in 2009. Peter joined in 2011. Did you know Scott Noel all along, or did you meet him when you came back from Florence?
I had a friend who was studying with him when I was in high school. I had met Scott once or twice, and then I came back from Florence and I found a studio, and what was called the Goldtex building. Scott had a studio there. And so I met him there, and then I started working at the academy, so I would see him a lot there. He's had a huge influence on me. He helped me see what else was possible other than just what I had learned in school. I had never seen work that had the quality that I was looking for, a certain quality of form and light that wasn't done in the 19th century. I just didn't know that existed. The internet wasn't around. If I didn't see a postcard of somebody's show, this is like the late 90s, early 2000s, there was no way to know that somebody like Phil Geiger, for example, existed. I would never have known that. If I did, I would have sought him out, but now I know about people like George Nick, Leonard Anderson, Rackstraw Downs, just a whole host of people. When you work hard enough and long enough, something that wasn't alive to you before becomes alive. This was the big revelation for me of coming back to Philly from Florence, was that when you live in Florence, everything looks like it's supposed to look when it's, quote, beautiful. And so the way I was painting and what I was seeing were together. And then I came back to Philadelphia and I was like, well, you can't paint this stuff. Like, this stuff isn't beautiful. And I had never seen anybody really do it. And then I saw people like Scott and Phil and George Nick and all those folks. And all of a sudden, this place that to me had seemed so dead was just animated with possibility by the paintings. The city never looked the same to me after I saw it painted by other people. And so the way that the efforts of those painters animated my own experience, that was like the most powerful thing to me. And I thought, oh, that's what I want to do.
Urban Philadelphia is not the only place that Peter paints.
All the very rural paintings are Alabama. My wife is from Alabama. Her family still lives down there. We spend a lot of time down there, and it's a great change of pace and change of environment. It's my version of how athletes do high altitude training. They'll go to a place where there's a lower oxygen content in order to work out. As a painter who is built completely on planar surfaces and the way that volume creates shapes in a painting, there's nowhere harder than pure woods and minimal structure. When you paint in Philadelphia, it's man-made structure punctuated by foliage. And in the South, it's the exact opposite. A barrage of chaos in the foliage, and then occasionally you get a structure to hang the painting off of. It's really challenging for me, but it's been incredibly helpful. It's made me try to live up to my philosophical creed in painting, which is that if anything is beautiful, then everything has to be beautiful. Therefore, I can't walk to a place and say, there's nothing to paint here. That's just a failure. If you're optimistic enough, creative enough, have a strong enough command of your language, you can make something out of anything.
Back in 2014, Peter told me that he went out at night walking with his dog and made drawings on the spot, which he then used to make into this painting in his studio. Do you still always start by drawing on paper and then move into painting?
Recently, I've been drawing on paper because I've been trying to take in this vast amount of space. And when you get far enough outside of the 60-degree cone of vision that most people think of as what is paintable, the fallacy of perspective starts to fall apart. When you get far enough out of that, you have all kinds of creative decisions that you have to make. And so the pencil drawing has just been the only way for me to sort through that stuff with freedom.
Peter explained that he starts now with a small, loose sketch as he moves through a space.
There are so many different ways to discover a space just by the way you sequence your movement around it. So I was trying to take whatever was captured in the small drawing and extend that gesture of space and the way it filled the format of the rectangle into a scaled up drawing, because if I just put the canvas in the space and start painting, I'm going to get a very different drawing. So I really wanted to find compositions that were developed without respect for how the easel might actually fit in there. perspectival space, I think we usually imagine a three-dimensional Cartesian grid, a kind of an XYZ axis cage almost of space. I think that makes sense mathematically, but then I think, well, you can grab that cage and give it gesture, twist it or pull it or push it, and then the space itself is more like a figure. The space starts to have a gesture to it. And gesture really is, to me, the key thing in art in general, I suppose.
I was looking at copies that you have done. They're highly gestural.
I don't think of them as copies, actually, so much as I think of them as covers, the way that a band would cover another band's song. I was just taking paintings that I liked. I was trying to discover my reaction to the painting. I was certainly not trying to copy the technique at all. In fact, I have a Vermeer copy. Vermeer would just be utterly horrified. I do think his technique is amazing, but that's not what I love about him. I'm just trying to paint what I get from it. I just do them fast.
Your landscapes, are they fast as well?
There's nothing fast about them. Hundreds of hours to become something. I also don't ever consider them finished, really. I could paint on stuff forever. They can take very, very long. It's like cooking red meat. You've either got to do it fast and it's got to be rare, or you have to stew it. You have to go all the way. And so, if you cook it just a little bit beyond rare and it starts to get tough, like 2 or 3 or 4 days on a painting, for me, I can't do that. It's either 1 day or 100 days.
And how about the in-class figure paintings?
I've always liked to try to work with my students, put myself in their shoes and try to be working on the same problems that they're working on. So that's what they are, class demonstrations. I love working with the figure, and it's not something that I do on my own. So I was kind of taking the advantage of the model availability too.
I asked Peter if he has considered bringing a model into his studio outside of school.
That would just be so much fun. I'm just so unreliable with my working methods and then also with my mood that I don't know if I can introduce that into the equation. It just seems like a variable I couldn't quite handle right now. I'd feel like I had to be working on the figure if the model was there. And if I sit down and say, I'm going to work on this today, that's like the thing I'm guaranteed to not work on. I don't feel free enough to have a model, but man, it would be great. I would love it.
I always want to understand the mind behind the artist. There is a phenomenon known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, in which poor performers overestimate their abilities. Talking to Peter, I began to suspect he suffers from the opposite. Remember how he was not good enough to be a student at PAFA? There's such an irony in that, because I think people who look at your paintings now think that the way you handle the paint and get a likeness to the world, it's amazing. It looks like you're an art genius or something.
I can't tell you, it couldn't be further from the truth. I still feel like somebody who just works a lot. Everything for me seems like a real struggle. Everything that I do that I'm even remotely happy with, it always feels like I stole it. It was luck. And I actually think that that's the right way. I think that you don't really have control over the best things that you do. That's why they're the best things. I at least long for the sense of control, like I could go out and do something reliably. You just have to give that up, I guess. That can be hard.
Well, one of the things I really love about your paintings is how you have certain areas that are very clearly delineated, but then you have these other areas where you know enough to leave it alone. It'll be a smear of paint, but everything seems to go together so well. How do you know how to do that?
I don't really know how to do it. I can just tell you that when I'm painting, I think what I get is the result of a process trying to dig through the world and getting fascinated with certain things and then falling out of love with those things and painting over them. And there really is no system. My mind and my emotional climate, let's say, is very, very erratic. My painting shows that. I can get really, really interested in something and then lose interest and come focus on something else and then get anxious that the painting is falling apart. And so I'll paint a big brush over a big part of it again. And it's a little bit chaotic, really. If they stay together at all, I think it's because at bottom, I think I'm very analytical. I'm running a lot of background programs to keep the paintings more or less together since they're so chaotic in the sense of focus and resolution.
You've mentioned your mood a couple times. What is your mood like now that we're living through this pandemic?
I guess it's not really any more or less erratic than usual. I guess I'm a little more conscious of it now that I don't go out much. Not that I went out that much before. Painting is perfect preparation to be self-quarantined. I'm just very aware of how much my decisions are related to inexplicable changes in how I feel. I'm just so curious about what motivates people to do things and what makes people different from one another. If you talk to an artist and said, hey, do you sometimes feel like, oh, you're really, really good and the things are great, and then 5 minutes later you have the opposite feeling? I think most solo creators would be like, yeah, that's standard. I just think it's interesting if you dig into that. Oh, why is that? In the course of 3 hours, how can you go from, this is just ridiculous, why am I doing this, to having the exact opposite feeling? And all that really changes is the self-story that you have.
I've become an evangelist for creative activity. I just think doing stuff that is creative, regardless of whether it's any good or not, it's just the greatest thing in the world.
I totally agree.
Whatever self-doubts this wonderful artist may harbor, he is also a very grateful man. On the last page of his catalog for his Harrisburg show, Peter expresses his love and appreciation for his two brothers, his parents, his wife Carolyn, and their son Sam. He also talks about the profound effect both Ramiro Sanchez and Scott Noel have had on his art. And so far, the pandemic has not been too bad for him.
I'm very lucky. From a philosophical point of view, I haven't really been deprived of anything. There's still light and there's still forms for the light to hit, and I've still got eyes and stuff to paint with. Contact with a tradition and a language that you love, and simultaneous contact with the world that you're perceiving and with an imagined audience that's alive today. I just love that.